Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show, y'all. Surviving prison physically, mentally, and spiritually will change who you think you are. The things that can happen to you in here, whether it's coming from other inmates or prison officials, will change everything about you, all in the name of survival. Now, this story is about these guys, Tim and Sam. They were best friends growing up. And when they were younger, they lived in upstate New York. And when they were younger, an incident occurred that brought a lot of hardship to Sam's family. Let me explain to you what happened to him, right? Sam's father was abusive towards his mother. And one night, when Sam was in the bed sleeping, he heard his mother screaming and hollering, telling her husband to stop, that she couldn't take it anymore. And Sam, he was about 8 or 9 years old at this particular time, and he jumped up out of the bed and he ran downstairs to help his mother. And he saw his mother on the floor near the fireplace, right? And his father was standing over her with his hands raised, about to hit her again, and she just lay there with fear all in her eyes as she looked up to him, trying to anticipate the blow. And Sam just struck out running towards his father, and he pushed him as hard as he could. Now, keep in mind, this is a grown man. So when Sam crashed into him with all he had in him, right, it made his father hit his head right above the banister, at a fireplace. He hit his head, he hit the ground. Blood is coming out of his head. Sam's mother looks at him and she gets up and she grabs him and said, "What are you doing? You didn't have to do that. Why did you come downstairs?" And he was crying. He said, "Mama, I'm trying to help you." He said, "Daddy was going to hurt you." And she looks at him, and then she looks over at her husband that's laying on the ground, and she goes over there and she touches his neck to try to see if he has a pulse, and he does. And she said, "We got to go." Because she didn't want to be there when he woke up, because she knew that he would probably try to take it out on Sam for doing what he had done. So they got all of their stuff together, and they got in the car, and they left. And they drove all night. They had family in Tennessee. So they drove all the way to Tennessee to get away from him. Now, when he came to, he had a terrible headache, but he was okay. Nobody was in the house. So he goes through the house, he's yelling, "Where are you at? Where are you at? I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." He's doing all of these things because, he's upset about what happened, but he can't find them. And he starts to panic. He starts to think that maybe she went to the police or they're on the way to get him and all this and that, right? Because he had been beating on her for years. And she had been to the hospital many, many times for these suspicious injuries, right? And, nurses had tried to talk to her and tell her that she couldn't continue to take this, but she never really admitted to any of the nurses except for one that she was in an abusive relationship, but she had no options. She didn't know what she was going to do. So to counter what he thought was about to happen to him, he's paranoid. He's thinking that she's going to call the police on him and they're going to be coming to pick him up any minute because she had just gotten fed up with what was going on, right? See, he didn't know she had left the state. So he calls the police and he files a police report against her. He says that she assaulted him and had kidnapped his son. So they put out an APB, an all points bulletin, for the car, her, and the son. It's all over TV. But then days go by, weeks go by, and then all of a sudden, the police in New York get a call from the police in Tennessee. And they tell them that they have apprehended Sam and his mother, and that they would start to proceed with the extradition paperwork that they had to do before they could take them back. So when the New York detectives came down to Tennessee to talk to her, she told them that there has to be some mistake, that she never assaulted her husband, that her husband had been beating her. So once they heard that version of the story, she told them, look at me. And she showed them the bruises on her body. And they noticed this because from their training, they understand what that looks like. But she had never filed a police report at all. Nobody really knew what was going on. So to be cautious, to be safe about the situation, they had her in jail, but they had put her son in Child Protective Services because the father had come down to Tennessee to take the son back. But because of this newfound information, they would not release him to his father until they understood exactly what was going on. So during the course of the investigation, they asked her, said, did you ever go to the hospital? She told them yes. Did you ever tell anybody what happened? She said no. But they investigated anyway, and they found that one nurse that could corroborate her story. That one nurse that she confided in, that one statement that she had made to the nurse that she didn't know what to do. She had no options. So now they thought that the husband's story was a little suspicious. They didn't have much to go on, but they had enough to make them say, hold up, pump the brakes. So then they went to the little boy. They went to Sam and they talked to Sam and they said, what happened? What's been going on with your mother and father? And Sam told him. And he told him that he had been beating his mother for years, as long as he could remember. And he said this particular night, he was afraid that he was going to kill her. So he ran down the stairs, and as hard as he could, he ran into his father and pushed him. And his father hit his head on the banister above the fireplace and then knocked him unconscious, and they got out of there. So now the police, they go back to the father. They tell the father this information that they had just learned. And the father's story started to fall apart. And now they knew that he was lying, that he was trying to use them to get them back into his custody. That was going to be leverage over them, those charges. And if they didn't do what he wanted them to do, he would be able to just go ahead and prosecute the mother and have custody of the son. Somebody that he could beat on and take out his demons and play father with in an abusive way. But it didn't work. It didn't work. So the charges were ultimately dismissed. But in the meantime, in between time, Sam had to spend some time in the Child Protective Services. And while he was in Child Protective Services, it changed his life. It changed his life. See, Sam was, Sam was a little boy turning 10 years old that had not much experience in fighting. It's not uncommon. But he was a little bit feminine. You know what I'm saying? You ever had a friend that, he's cool, he's down, he's all this and all that, but he just ain't all rough, rugged, and raw like a lot of kids are, like a lot of little boys are. See, that was Sam. That was Sam. See, so while he was in protective custody, protective services, they had placed him in a juvenile place where, a lot of kids that go through things are held. And there was a couple of guys at this place that were brutal towards him. Brutal. Just brutal. And they assaulted him day after day. They were trying to get him to engage in sexual activities with them. And he refused because he was not like that. And they kept beating him and they kept beating him. And then one day, there was this other kid that was a little bit bigger than all of them. He stood up for Sam and he told the other kids, leave him alone. And they fought. And this one kid that stood up for Sam, he beat the other two up. And they eventually backed away and stopped assaulting Sam. So this one kid that stood up for Sam, he went to the counselor that had that particular unit, and he asked her, would she move Sam in with him where they, could protect each other and be the type of, looking out for each other that you have to have in a situation like that, because it gets dangerous, especially in juvenile facilities. So she talked to him and she told him that she really didn't think that would be a good idea because she knew that this particular kid was rougher. But he had had some issues in the past. And it had been discovered that he believed that he was gay. So the counselor, trying to get in the middle of things and trying to keep something from happening, she thought that maybe he was trying to manipulate this situation so he could get Sam off to himself and then get him involved in activities that he didn't necessarily want to be involved in. They just couldn't condone it. So she talked to him and she told him, she said, So the kid told her, he said, no, that is not what I'm trying to do. I just don't like people that force people to do the types of things that they don't want to do. So after some consultation with the other counselors, they had learned that this young kid was a good kid. He just had some issues. They approved the move. And him and Sam moved in to the same little area together, and they became real good friends, and Sam felt safe. Sam felt safe. And he talked to Sam about things because he wondered if Sam was gay, and turns out that Sam is not gay, was not gay. But he told Sam, he said, in here, you got to do what you got to do to survive the environment. So Sam talked to him, and as time went on, he said, are you gay? And the little boy told Sam, he said, I think I am, but I don't involve myself in things like that in here. Now, keep in mind, this is a kid too. So now Sam, he tells me, he says, so you let people think that about you? He said, I let them think whatever they want to think about me. I let them think whatever they want to think about me. And he said, you might want to do that. You don't have to be what I am. But if they think you are, and they think that we're together, they'll leave you alone. So Sam, he felt weird about that. He said, nah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So one day when he went to lunch, they eat 3 meals a day at the juvenile place. These other 2 kids that used to assault him, they sat down at the table with him because his friend wasn't nowhere in sight. You know what I mean? So they sat down at the table with him. They told him, said, you think you're safe, but you're not. We're going to get you. So Sam told him, he said, you can't mess with me because I'm with him. And he pointed at his friend that was walking in at that particular time. So the 2 kids that were sitting there said, I knew it. They said, okay, if that's your man, go ahead on. And right then and there in that moment, Sam realized that what his friend had been telling him, it played well inside of the institution. And he never forgot that. He never forgot that lesson. And he remembered that. Now, fast forward. Sam is released from the juvenile facility. Him and his mom go back to New York. She's separated from the abusive husband that she had for years. In fact, he ended up in a situation where he got locked up, so she felt all the more safe about that. And her and Sam were able to go on with their lives. In comes Tim. Tim's family lived on the same street that Sam lived on. And him and Sam became best friends. Best friends. And Sam would share with Tim all the things that happened to him and his mother, you know what I'm saying, from time to time when he felt like talking. And Tim, he started to understand Sam a little bit more, right? So one day, Sam opened up to him and he told him, he said, you know, when I was locked up in juvenile, I had to pretend that I was gay so that people wouldn't mess with me. And he told Tim about how he got beat up day after day until this one guy stood up for him and protected him and fought for him and got it arranged to where he could move into the same area with him so that he could look out for him and they could look out for each other. And Tim, as he listened to his story, he felt bad about the situation that Sam had gone through, but he said, so Tim tells Sam that, like I said, it's not going to happen. I would have never done anything like that. I wouldn't have pretended to be somebody that I'm not just so that people wouldn't bother me and all this and that. And most people, I would imagine, would say the same thing. You might even be saying the same thing right now while you're listening to this because you've never been in this environment, right? Now, keeping it real, it's some things that I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do, right? But that was not an issue for me. The issue for me in surviving this environment came with money. So I started to do what? Sell drugs and do all of the things that you do in that vein to make it through this. Full-fledged gang member, doing all of these things to survive the environment. And then after a while, it became who I am. That's who I thought I was. My identity was wrapped up in all of that. And if I didn't do these things, I felt like people didn't like me, didn't respect me. And that drove me. Because once you start to feel like people don't like you and don't respect you, and if it turns out that it's true, then guess what? You become the prey and not the predator. You understand what I'm saying? And for me, it was more important for me to be the predator versus the prey. So keep it clear about this environment. But here's the trick. Here's the trick. Life goes on. Fast forward, years later, where you have Tim and Sam still good friends, but they're adults now. And their lives have taken different turns. Sam he's married, he has a job, and he has a kid on the way, and he's doing all these things. Tim, on the other hand, he's still not married. You know, they're young, you know, and he's not married, but his mom, she's getting remarried, and Tim wants to get into the modeling game. He has that look, and they live in New York. They live in New York. So she talks to people that she knows and tries to get him, you know, a leg up in the game and all this and that. And her new husband, he knows some people. So he gets Tim a gig with a guy that does underwear modeling. And Tim, it fits. It takes off for him. So he's getting these gigs, small gigs, but he's traveling, he's seeing the country, and he's getting these gigs, and he's getting notoriety, and it starts to pick up. He's able to provide for himself. He's taking care of himself, and that's all he ever wanted, was to be able to take care of himself, help his mom out every now and then if he had to, and now he's able to do that, and he's starting to grow in the game. So one day, after a hard day's work, on the shooting and taking pictures and all this and that, him and a few friends, they stopped by one of the bars in their neighborhood. And they have a few drinks. Now, they're not in New York at this particular time. They're somewhere in the South, right? And they have a few drinks. And when Tim is leaving the bar, he's a little tipsy. And guess what? He has an accident. And the person in the other car is killed. And he's arrested when the police get there, and they charge him with DUI. And then later on, he's charged with vehicular homicide. The indictment comes down, y'all. And now he's got a vehicular homicide charge hanging over his head. And he calls his mom. And he tells his mom what had happened. And she cries and says, we're going to do everything we can to help you. And they get him a lawyer. And then Sam comes to visit him because he's in jail. The bond is too high for him to make, and he doesn't want to make the bond anyway because he's hoping that he'll be able to pay this lawyer some of this money that he can get out of this situation without having to go to prison. But when Sam comes to visit him, they talk, and Sam tells him, he said, listen to me. I told you when I got caught up and was in juvenile because of what my father had done, that I had to do whatever I had to do to survive. And he said, I know you said you'll never do this, and I respect that, but do whatever you have to do to survive this. Because being in a place like this will change you. It'll change you if you let it. He said, I have a lot of regrets, but one of the things that I don't regret is that I survived the experience. And he said, I know you feel a certain way, but he said, you have never experienced anything like what you are about to experience if you don't get out of this. So Tim was a little upset because Sam made him feel like that he didn't believe that he was going to ever get out of this situation and so on and so forth, right? But see, Sam faced the realities of life. Tim, like a lot of people when they get arrested, and I was like this, thinking, well, I'll just be able to go up in here and I'll explain what happened and all this, and I'll be able to talk my way out of this, and I'll be able to walk up out of that courtroom. That is not how it works in 99.9% of the situations. Somebody's going to pay. Somebody has to answer, especially if somebody dies, y'all. Especially if somebody died. It better been a situation where you might have went into a diabetic coma, something happened on some medication. It better be another situation that can explain that you were not responsible for what you did driving drunk. And there was none for Tim. So subsequently, Tim ended up being sentenced to 8 years through a plea agreement that he made. His lawyer went and got him a plea deal. The best he could get him. 8 years. 8 years in the prison. In the South. In the South, y'all. And now he has to make some hard decisions, y'all. He has to make some hard decisions, and it's going to be difficult for him. And if you want to know how difficult it's going to be for Tim, you're going to have to tune into the next episode, right? Because it's going to get better. But there's a lesson in this, and I need you to really focus and pay attention to what it is that I'm saying, y'all. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.